It's January 5th, Monday morning. The world has officially restarted, and the roar of everyone else's new life is deafening. You're sitting at the kitchen table, and that pristine page titled 2026 Goals is now 5 days old. Your pen hasn't moved. The list you wrote with such conviction on New Year's Eve now feels like a contract you're already breaching. This isn't procrastination. Procrastination has energy to it, nervous avoidance, creative distraction, the electricity of putting something off. This is different. This is watching yourself from behind glass, confused by your own inaction. The gap between what you know you should want and what your body can actually mobilize toward feels unbridgeable. And beneath the flatness, something worse settles in, a familiar shame that whispers you're simply not the kind of person who follows through. But here's what makes this moment particularly strange. You've done hard things before. You've met impossible deadlines. You've pushed through exhaustion to care for people who needed you. You've managed responsibilities that would have broken others. So why can't you do this? Why can't you follow through on goals you genuinely want for yourself, with no one watching, no external pressure? Why does the simplest act of self-improvement, something millions of people seem to manage, feel like trying to lift a weight with muscles that have simply stopped responding? In this video, we're exploring the physiological reality behind this experience, something researchers in trauma-informed psychology are calling nervous system shutdown. We'll uncover why New Year's resolutions trigger this response with particular intensity, and why the people most likely to experience this collapse are often the same people who have spent years overriding their body's signals in the name of productivity, responsibility, and self-improvement. We'll examine the concept of allostatic load and nervous system debt, explore why high-achieving, should-driven individuals are especially vulnerable to this pattern, look at what's actually happening in your body when motivation flatlines, and understand why sustainable change requires working with your nervous system rather than against it. And we'll discuss the profound reframe that changes everything. What if your inability to follow through isn't the problem, but the solution? If you've ever felt the confusion of wanting something but being unable to move toward it, if you've been called lazy when you know you're actually exhausted, if January feels less like a fresh start and more like evidence of your fundamental inadequacy, this is the explanation you've been searching for. This is the neuroscience of shutdown. Let's begin. This collapse doesn't begin in January. It begins months, sometimes years earlier, in the invisible accumulation of something researchers call allostatic load. Your body is designed to handle stress through a beautifully orchestrated response system. Threat detected, resources mobilized, action taken, recovery initiated, baseline restored. The cycle completes, but that's not how most people live anymore. Instead, you've been running a deficit, meeting deadlines while your body needed sleep, managing other people's emotions while your own stayed unprocessed, pushing through illness because stopping wasn't an option, responding to messages at all hours because that's what responsible people do. Your nervous system was designed for acute stress, the kind that arrives, demands response, then releases. Not the chronic kind, not the kind that never really ends. Think of it like microfractures in bone under repetitive stress. One impact, the bone absorbs. 2, 3, 100, still holding. The fractures are microscopic, invisible on any scan, undetectable in how you move through the world. You appear fine, you function, you meet expectations. But beneath the surface, the structure is compromising itself, one tiny break at a time, accumulating damage that has nowhere to go. This is what allostatic load means, the cumulative wear on your body from chronic stress and repeated adaptation demands. Your system compensates for a while through emergency reserves, adrenaline when you have no natural energy, cortisol when you need to push past your limits, sheer willpower when your body begs you to stop. These mechanisms work. That's the dangerous part. They work so well you don't realize you're borrowing from a reserve that's steadily depleting. But these systems were never designed for permanent activation. Adrenaline was meant to get you away from the predator, not through every Tuesday. Cortisol was designed to mobilize resources for crisis, not to be your baseline state. Willpower is a muscle that requires recovery between uses, not a constant override of every signal your body sends. Eventually, something has to give. Not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly, inevitably, like a battery that's been drained and recharged too many times, finally losing its capacity to hold a charge at all. Your nervous system, having protected you from complete collapse for as long as it could, finally pulls the emergency brake. This is where shutdown begins. From the outside, this looks like laziness. Someone who was functioning perfectly well suddenly can't seem to do basic things, can't start the workout routine they planned, can't open the language app they downloaded, can't take the first step toward goals they claim to want. From the outside, it looks like a motivation problem, a discipline problem, a character problem. But from the inside, it's something else entirely. It's not that you don't want these things. You can articulate exactly why they matter. You can see the version of yourself who does them, who becomes them. You can feel how much better life would be if you could just start. The desire is there. The understanding is there. What's missing is the capacity to translate intention into action, and that gap feels like standing on one side of a canyon with no bridge. This is the cruelty of shutdown. Your cognitive mind remains fully online, while your capacity for sustained action goes offline. You can think clearly about what needs to happen. You can plan, strategize, analyze, but when it comes time to actually do the thing, your body simply won't mobilize. It's like your mind is writing checks your nervous system can't cash. The psychological term for this state is dorsal vagal shutdown, a response governed by the oldest part of your autonomic nervous system. When fight or flight has been exhausted, when you've run every race and fought every battle until there's nothing left, the nervous system has one final strategy: immobilization. In animals, this looks like playing dead. In humans, it looks like depression without the mood, exhaustion without physical exertion, a heaviness that settles into your bones and makes even the smallest task feel impossibly difficult. Here's what most people miss. This isn't a malfunction. It's a protective response. Your nervous system, having monitored your internal state for months or years, has determined that you cannot afford one more demand, one more push, one more cycle of override and continue. So it does the only thing it can to stop you from completely burning out. It shuts down forward momentum. It makes rest not optional by making action nearly impossible. This is where the real misunderstanding lives. Society interprets this as weakness. You interpret it as failure. But your nervous system is actually trying to save you. It's the part of you that still knows survival matters more than productivity, that being alive matters more than being impressive, that sometimes the most intelligent response to chronic overextension is to simply stop. But why do some people end up here while others don't? Why do certain nervous systems accumulate this kind of debt, while others seem to maintain their reserves? The answer usually lives in what you learned long before you had words for it. For many people experiencing this pattern, rest was never safe. Pause meant punishment. Slowing down meant falling behind, disappointing someone, proving you weren't enough. Your nervous system learned early that worth was conditional, not on being, but on doing, not on existing, but on achieving. Your value had to be earned repeatedly, with no assurance it would hold until tomorrow. So you developed what looks like discipline, but is actually hypervigilance dressed as conscientiousness. You learned to override fatigue because acknowledging it wasn't an option. You learned to push through pain because stopping invited criticism. You learned to stay activated because rest felt more dangerous than exhaustion. Your nervous system's threat detection system became exquisitely attuned not to external danger, but to the possibility of being seen as lazy, selfish, or inadequate. This creates a particular kind of nervous system architecture. Researchers studying developmental trauma and attachment have found that children who grow up in environments where their needs are consistently unmet, or where love is conditional on performance, develop what's called an insecure, anxious, or disorganized attachment style. Their nervous systems never fully learn that safety is possible, that rest can happen without catastrophe, that they can simply be without constantly proving their right to take up space. These children become adults who look exceptionally high-functioning. They're reliable, they're responsible, they're the ones everyone depends on. But internally, they're running on fumes, constantly monitoring for signs they're slipping, perpetually one step ahead of the shame that tells them they're not doing enough. They never learned to distinguish between genuine rest and dangerous complacency, so they eliminated rest entirely. Your body kept the score. Every time you override its signals, ignore hunger to finish a project, suppress exhaustion to meet someone else's needs, push through illness to maintain your image of competence, you're sending a message. Your signals don't matter. We're going to keep going regardless. Eventually, your nervous system stops bothering to send clear signals. Why would it? You've proven you won't listen anyway. This is the foundation upon which the shutdown builds. You didn't fail to rest because you're lazy. You failed to rest because rest never felt safe enough to attempt. And now, years later, your nervous system is demanding what you never gave it willingly, the chance to finally, desperately stop. Which brings us to why New Year's resolutions trigger this collapse with such precision. January represents a cultural moment of forced activation. Start fresh, optimize yourself, become better, finally become the person you've been failing to be, precisely when many people's nervous systems most need rest and recovery. Think about what's actually required for sustainable behavior change. Neurobiologically, you need three things: adequate ventral vagal tone, which is the state of social engagement and feeling safe in your body, sufficient energy reserves to tolerate the discomfort of learning new patterns, and the capacity to handle the inevitable frustration, setback, and awkwardness that comes with doing something unfamiliar. These aren't optional. They're the foundation. When you're in nervous system shutdown, you have access to none of these. Your ventral vagal system, the part that allows you to feel connected, engaged, curious about life, is offline. Your energy reserves aren't just low, they're in debt. And your capacity to tolerate discomfort is already maxed out, just managing the baseline heaviness of existing in this state. You're trying to build a house on ground that can't support a foundation. But here's what makes this particularly insidious. Consciously, you don't recognize this. Your cognitive mind, still functional, still articulate, tells you that other people manage this, that if you just tried harder, planned better, wanted it more, you could do it too. Your mind is writing a check: 5 workouts a week, daily language practice, complete career pivot, that your nervous system absolutely cannot cash. So you set the goals anyway. You write them down with genuine intention, and for a day, maybe 2, you might even follow through. Activation can be forced temporarily. Willpower can override shutdown for brief periods, but it's not sustainable. It's like trying to run a marathon on a broken leg. You might make it a few yards on adrenaline, but the collapse is inevitable. When the collapse comes, you interpret it as proof of your inadequacy. You don't think, my nervous system was in shutdown and couldn't support behavior change. You think, I failed again. I'm the problem. I'm just someone who can't follow through. The shame deepens. The deficit grows. And next January, you'll try again from an even more depleted state. There's a concept in trauma therapy called the window of tolerance, the zone in which your nervous system can process experience, engage with challenge, and adapt to stress without becoming overwhelmed or shutting down. Inside this window, you can learn, you can grow, you can handle discomfort without it tipping into dysregulation. Above the window is hyperarousal, anxiety, panic, rage, the feeling of being too much, too fast, too activated to think clearly. Below the window is hypoarousal, shutdown, numbness, disconnection, the heavy flatness where you're watching life happen without being able to fully participate in it. When you're in shutdown, you've dropped below the window entirely. Here's what this means practically. Behavior change, goal pursuit, learning new patterns, all of these require you to be within or slightly outside your window of tolerance. They require enough activation to engage, but not so much you're overwhelmed. Enough energy to tolerate frustration, but not so depleted you collapse at the first difficulty. Attempting these things from shutdown is like asking someone to sprint while their legs are asleep. The mechanics aren't there. The substrate required for the action doesn't exist. You can visualize the sprint perfectly. You can understand exactly how it should feel. You can desperately want to do it, but your body cannot execute what your mind is requesting. This is the bizarre disconnection people in shutdown describe. I know what to do. I understand why it matters. I genuinely want the outcome, but I cannot make myself move toward it. It's not resistance. Resistance has a quality of pushing back, of active avoidance. This is just nothing. A void where motivation should be, an emptiness where drive used to live. What makes this particularly confusing is that you remember what it felt like to be inside your window. You remember when goals excited you, when starting something new felt energizing, when you could wake up on a Monday and actually want to tackle your list. That version of you feels simultaneously very close and impossibly far away. You can see them clearly, which makes their absence more painful. The truth your mind hasn't yet accepted: that version of you had a nervous system that felt safe enough to engage with life. You don't. Not right now. And no amount of willpower, strategy, or self-criticism will put you back inside that window. The only thing that will is genuine recovery, the kind that rebuilds capacity rather than just forcing temporary activation. This pattern doesn't just affect your relationship with goals. It affects your relationship with everyone in your life, though often in ways they can't see and you can't explain. When you're in shutdown, your capacity for genuine connection decreases significantly, not because you don't care about people, you do, often intensely, but because connection requires energy you don't have. It requires being present, emotionally available, able to hold space for someone else's experience while managing your own. Your nervous system, in conservation mode, is rationing every resource. Social engagement gets deprioritized. From the outside, this might look like withdrawal. You stop reaching out. You decline invitations. You respond to messages with increasing delays, your answers getting shorter, less engaged. People who care about you start to wonder if they've done something wrong. People who depend on you start to feel frustrated. The more isolated you become, the more your nervous system confirms its assessment. It's not safe out there. Better to stay small, stay quiet, conserve what little energy remains. But here's the cruel irony. What your nervous system actually needs to exit shutdown is connection, not the performative kind where you show up and pretend to be fine. The real kind, co-regulation, the experience of having your nervous system settle in the presence of someone whose system feels safe. Ventral vagal engagement, where you remember what it feels like to be seen, understood, held in someone else's awareness without having to perform or produce. Yet accessing that requires vulnerability you can't afford. It requires showing up as you actually are, exhausted, unable to function, confused by your own inaction, and risking that the person will confirm your worst fear. That you really are just lazy, that this really is your fault, that you should be able to pull yourself together like everyone else seems to manage. So you isolate further. You hide the extent of the shutdown, performing just enough competence to avoid questions. You become skilled at saying, "I'm fine, just busy," when what you mean is, "I can barely get out of bed and I don't know why, and I'm terrified there's something fundamentally broken in me." The gap between your external presentation and internal reality grows until you're not sure anyone actually knows you anymore. This is where the shutdown becomes self-perpetuating. Isolation confirms the nervous system's belief that the world isn't safe, which deepens the shutdown, which makes connection feel even more impossible, which increases isolation. The cycle tightens until you forget there was ever another way to live. Even when you're alone, you're not really alone, because there's always the part of you watching, evaluating, keeping score on whether you're doing enough. This is what metacognition looks like in shutdown, a constant internal surveillance system that monitors every moment for evidence of your failure. You wake up and immediately inventory. What time is it? How much sleep did you get? Are you already behind? The day hasn't started, but you're already defending yourself against accusations that haven't been made. You notice how long you've been sitting. You calculate the hours you've wasted. You compare yourself to the imagined productivity of others, to the goals you set, to the person you believe you should be. The watching never stops. Even rest, if you manage it, comes with commentary. You're resting again. You just rested yesterday. Other people don't need this much rest. This is why you can't accomplish anything. Psychologists call this rumination when it's focused on the past, worry when it's focused on the future. But in shutdown, it's more constant than either term suggests. It's an ambient hum of self-evaluation that colors every experience, making even neutral moments feel like evidence in a case being built against you. Here's what this monitoring costs: energy. The same energy your nervous system is trying to conserve by shutting down forward momentum is being spent on watching yourself not move forward. It's like running a security system in a house you're trying to keep dark and quiet to save power. The very act of monitoring prevents the recovery that might restore capacity, and the monitoring has a particular focus. It's always measuring you against should. You should have done this by now. You should want this more. You should be like them. Should is the language of a nervous system that learned your worth is conditional, that rest is dangerous, that what you actually feel and need matters less than what you're supposed to feel and need. What you're not monitoring, whether you're hungry, tired, in pain, or genuinely resourced, whether your goals actually align with your values, or if they're just internalized expectations, whether the life you're trying to force yourself toward is even one you want, or if it's just the life you think you should want to avoid judgment. The watching convinces you it's helping, that if you just monitor closely enough, judge harshly enough, you'll finally shame yourself into action. But shame has never been a sustainable motivator. It might create a burst of anxious productivity, but it cannot build the steady, regulated activation required for lasting change. All it does is keep you trapped in the same cycle. Shutdown, self-judgment, forced activation, exhaustion, deeper shutdown. And here's where the psychological trap becomes inescapable. You need rest to recover capacity. But rest feels like the exact thing that got you into this situation. You need to stop judging yourself to exit the shame cycle. But not judging yourself feels like giving up, accepting that you'll never change. You need connection to feel safe enough to engage with life. Connection requires energy you don't have and vulnerability that feels too risky. This is a double bind, a situation where every option feels impossible, where the solution to the problem requires the very capacity the problem has taken away. You need to feel safe to exit shutdown, but you can't feel safe while you're in shutdown because shutdown is your nervous system's response to not feeling safe. The door out is locked from the inside, and you're supposed to find the key while everything in you is designed to stay frozen. Here's another layer. You need to stop forcing activation to allow recovery. But stopping feels like confirmation that you're lazy, that everyone was right about you, that you really can't be trusted to do anything without external pressure. So you oscillate, push, collapse, judge, push harder, collapse deeper, never staying in genuine rest long enough for it to restore anything. And perhaps most painfully, you need to meet yourself where you actually are. But where you actually are feels unacceptable. It feels like failure. It feels like proof that something is fundamentally wrong with you. So you keep setting goals from where you think you should be, energized, motivated, capable, while your nervous system is somewhere else entirely, desperately trying to signal that it needs something different. The should-driven mind says, other people can do this, so I should be able to. Other people set goals and follow through. Other people don't need this much rest. What's wrong with me that I can't do what everyone else does easily? But here's what that mind is missing. Those other people either have nervous systems that feel fundamentally safe, or they haven't yet accumulated the debt you're carrying. They're not better than you, they're not more disciplined, they're not morally superior, they're just operating from a different physiological state. Comparing your shutdown to their capacity is like comparing a phone at 2% battery to one that's fully charged and wondering why yours won't run the same apps. The only way out of this trap is to stop treating it like a trap you should be able to think your way out of, and start treating it like a physiological state that requires physiological intervention, safety, rest, regulated connection, and time. Not days, not weeks, maybe months, maybe longer. However long your specific nervous system needs to believe that it's actually safe to come back online. But there comes a moment, sometimes in exhausted surrender, sometimes in unexpected clarity, when something shifts. Not in your circumstances, not in your to-do list, in your understanding. The moment when you stop asking, what's wrong with me, and start asking, what has my nervous system been trying to tell me? The moment when your inability to follow through stops being evidence of your inadequacy and becomes information about your state. This is where shutdown stops being the thing you're ashamed of and becomes the thing that's been trying to save you. This recognition doesn't arrive with fanfare. It's quiet. It might come when you're lying on the couch for the third afternoon in a row, and instead of the usual spiral of self-judgment, you simply notice, I am so tired. Not performatively tired, Not tired in a way that's asking for permission, just tired in a way that's finally undeniably true. Or it comes when you realize you've been setting the same goals for 5 Januaries and they never get less heavy. And instead of concluding you're the problem, you start wondering if maybe the goals themselves are being set from a place that doesn't account for where your nervous system actually lives. There's a term for this in psychology: self-compassionate awareness. It's the capacity to observe your experience without immediately judging it, to notice patterns without making them evidence of your unworthiness, to get curious about what's happening instead of ashamed of it. For people who've spent years overriding their body signals, this feels completely foreign, almost dangerous. Because here's what self-compassion means in this context: accepting that you cannot currently do what you wish you could do, that your nervous system is not malfunctioning, it's responding exactly as it should to years of chronic stress and depletion. That rest isn't a reward you earn through productivity, it's the foundation that makes productivity possible. This is the pivot point. Not from shutdown to immediate action. That's still the old pattern, still trying to force what isn't ready. The pivot is from shame to curiosity, from "I should be better" to "what does my system actually need?" From fighting the shutdown to finally carefully listening to what it's been trying to say all along. We cannot keep going like this. Something has to change, and that something isn't your goals. It's your relationship to your own capacity. So what does working with your nervous system instead of against it actually look like? Not in theory. In practice, in the reality of your January 5th kitchen table with goals you can't mobilize toward. First, distinguish between authentic motivation and should-driven activation. Authentic motivation arises from a nervous system that feels safe enough to want things. It has a quality of pull rather than push. It's energizing, even when challenging. Should-driven activation feels heavy, obligatory, like you're dragging yourself towards something because you're supposed to, not because any part of you genuinely wants to. If your goals feel like items on someone else's list that you've internalized as your own, they're not going to work. Your nervous system won't mobilize toward things it doesn't actually want. Second, meet yourself where you actually are, not where you think you should be. This is harder than it sounds. It means that if your nervous system is in shutdown, your only genuine goal might be rest without guilt. Not rest as a strategy to become productive later. Not rest that you have to justify. Rest as the actual, legitimate need your body has been trying to communicate for months or years. This might mean your goal for January isn't to add anything, but to consciously reduce total demands until you can feel the edges of your capacity again. Third, understand that rebuilding nervous system capacity happens through micro movements, not massive overhauls. You don't exit shutdown by forcing yourself back into high activation. You exit it by finding the smallest possible action that your system can actually support, and then celebrating not what that action accomplished, but what it signals, that you're beginning to feel safe enough to engage with life again. Maybe that's one gentle stretch in the morning. Maybe it's 10 minutes outside. Maybe it's sending one text to one friend. The action itself matters less than whether your nervous system can approach it without threat. Fourth, build in genuine recovery, not just scheduled productivity. Most people's planners are full of things to do with no space for nervous system regulation. Recovery isn't scrolling on your phone while your mind races. Activities that actively signal safety to your system. Time in nature, regulated breathing, creative expression with no goal, physical movement that feels good rather than punishing, connection with people who don't require you to perform. And finally, the hardest one. Accept that your timeline for change might be different than cultural expectations, that while everyone else is sprinting into their New Year transformations, you might need to spend this season just learning to rest. That growth might look less like acquiring new habits and more like releasing old patterns. That healing is not linear, and the path out of shutdown doesn't run through more achievement. It runs through finally allowing yourself to be imperfect, ordinary, human. From a kitchen table on January 5th, where a list of goals sat untouched and shame whispered its familiar accusations, to here, the recognition that shutdown is not failure, but communication. That your nervous system isn't broken, it's trying to save you. That the inability to follow through isn't evidence of your inadequacy, but of how long you've been strong without rest. This journey doesn't end with you suddenly able to complete every goal on your list. That was never the point. The point is understanding that worth isn't conditional on continuous self-improvement, that your body's wisdom, even when it manifests as shutdown, deserves to be listened to, not overridden. That's sometimes the most radical thing you can do in a culture that demands constant optimization, is simply allow yourself to stop. If you're watching this in January with goals you can't seem to start, or in any month with that familiar flatness where motivation should be, I want you to hear this. You're not lazy, you're not broken, you're not the problem. Your nervous system has been trying to protect you the only way it knows how, and maybe it's time to finally listen. Maybe your only goal this year is to rest well enough that next year, authentic motivation, the kind that comes from safety rather than should, becomes possible again. This channel exists for conversations like this one, for the moments when you need someone to translate what you're experiencing from shame into understanding, from judgment into compassion. If this video gave you language for something you've been living without words, subscribe so you can find your way back when you need these reminders. And in the comments, if you feel able, share what shutdown feels like for you. Your experience might be the permission someone else needs to finally stop fighting their own nervous system. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to be where you are. You're allowed to disappoint productivity culture's expectations of who you should become. Your nervous system has been trying to tell you this for a long time. Maybe now finally you can believe it.